Hello, today I'm going to be answering the question, what is the best cooling configuration for Lian's brand new O11 Dynamic EVO? So hopefully by this stage you'll already seen the full step-by-step build guide and the case review I've done for Lian's O11 Dynamic EVO. If you haven't, you'll find links to those videos in the description. Since then, I've been pretty busy. I've tested 19 different configurations in this case, and I'm confident that I can answer what is the best way to build in this case. Now, when I say the best way to build, I'm basing that on three important factors. Obviously temperatures, but importantly as well, we need to look at the noise levels and also the aesthetics. And a case that has got so much glass in it, the aesthetics are very important because there's no point building a PC that runs cool and quiet if it looks ugly. So the first configuration that I was keen to test was one that maximised out all the case fan locations and importantly didn't require any of the extra kit, for example the front mesh panel kit or any of our options for mounting the graphics card in an upright or vertical position. So our RTX 3080 was mounted horizontally. We had the silent loop 2 at the top of the case set to exhaust with 3 Lian unifans on the radiator, and I used all Lian unifans as case fans. We had 3 at the side of the case set to intake, 3 at the bottom set to intake, and a single rear exhaust case fan. All of the fans in the build were running off the stock motherboard fan curves without any modification, and the pump on the IO was running at 100%. And if you didn't see my original build video, the CPU in the system is Intel's new i7 12700K running at stock motherboard settings. So in terms of doing the thermal testing, I recorded the lowest CPU and GPU temperature with the PC idling in Windows with no programs open in the background. I then ran a 10-minute IDA64 stability test and recorded the maximum CPU and GPU temperature during that stability test. I recorded an average noise level both at idle and under load. The first thing I wanted to do was see did it make any difference if the fans on the side of the case were set to intake or exhaust. When I did my testing in the original O11 Dynamic, I did find a benefit with having these fans set to intake, whether they were on the radiator or as case fans. But the big downside to that was at that stage, the rear side of the fans, which would be shown if the fan was set to intake, were all really ugly. Things have moved on since then, and actually the rear side of these Lian unifans, they're the L120s, actually, in my opinion, looks almost better than the front of them. You've got this lovely silver medallion. So it really doesn't matter what way these fans are round now from an aesthetic point of view, and we can actually judge this completely in terms of the temperatures and the noise levels. So taking a look at the temperatures, and these were really what I was expecting. Having the fan set to intake, our CPU idled 2 degrees cooler and was 3 degrees cooler during the IDA64 stability test. We also got a benefit in GPU temperatures under load, and they came down by 2 degrees. Again, another thing I was expecting was our PC was also quieter by 3 decibels under load. So again, based on my testing on the original O11 Dynamic and all the mini cases that I've done extensive thermal testing in, these results I was expecting. You're going to get better temperatures with the fans on the side set to intake. As well, the noise levels will go down significantly. One of the biggest sources of noise in these cases is having your radiator fans on the side set to exhaust. So having them set to intake, the noise came down as expected. And in terms of aesthetics, with these fans, it doesn't make any difference what way they're round. So you're best of all having your fans on the side set to intake. The next thing I wanted to test was, did any one of Lian's optional accessories, which was the front mesh panel, make any difference in terms of temperatures? So I added the front mesh panel and added an extra 3 Lian unifans to the front set to intake. So taking a look at the temperatures with the front mesh panel and the additional 3 intake fans at the front of the case, our CPU idled 1 degree cooler and was 2 degrees cooler under load. Our GPU idled 1 degree hotter and there was no difference to the GPU temperatures under load. And there was no difference to the noise levels between the two configurations. So if we judge this one only on temperatures, you would conclude that the front intake fans and mesh panel are a good idea because they give you slightly lower temperatures. It is important to remember that the temperatures are only slightly lower, and that is going to come at a significant cost. And that cost is both financially and in terms of aesthetics. Financially, you're going to have to buy the mesh panel, You're also going to have to buy an additional 3 fans, which aren't cheap, but the biggest cost for me is actually the aesthetics, and I just do not think this case looks as good with the front mesh panel as it does with the glass panel. So for me, I would stay away from the front intake fans and mesh panel because you're only getting a tiny benefit in terms of temperatures, but the cost for me is too high. The next thing I want to look at was, did it make any difference if we removed the bottom fans? So with the bottom fans removed, our CPU idled 1 degree hotter, but there was no difference to the maximum CPU temperature under load. Our GPU also ran hotter by 1 degree, both at idle and under load. In terms of noise levels, without the bottom fans, there was 1 decibel less noise at idle, but no difference to the noise levels under load. So looking at this again in terms of temperatures, having the bottom intake fans does improve the temperatures, but only by a small amount. And in fact, this tells me that this case has such a good side intake that you only get a very minimal benefit in terms of temperatures by adding bottom fans in addition to the side intake fans. Where you might want to add them might come from aesthetics. I think it does look better if you're filling all the fan mounting locations in this case, and I think having the fans at the bottom does look well. You're going to have to weigh that up yourself and decide whether spending the extra money on them is worth it in terms of aesthetics and that small improvement in terms of GPU and CPU temperatures. The next thing I wanted to do was test out the effects of leaving out the side fans, so I went ahead and replaced the bottom fans and removed the side fans. So with the side fans removed, there was no difference to our CPU idle temperatures, although our CPU ran 1 degree hotter under load. Our GPU temperatures increased by 1 degree, both at idle and under load, and despite the fact that we'd actually removed fans, the noise was actually 1 decibel louder under load. And again, this is something that I have seen. Having the fans on the side set to intake does reduce noise in this case. So again here the results are very similar to our last test. Having the fans on the side does improve temperatures by a small amount, makes very little difference in terms of noise levels, but for me here the fans on the side do have a big effect from an aesthetic point of view. I think having the fans on the side, no matter whether they're set to intake or exhaust, using some good fans like these Lian Uni fans AL120s look absolutely great. Leaving them out I don't think looks good in this particular case because the panel that you have in its place has lots of holes in it for mounting hard drives and SSDs on the back of it. I just think having this on full display really takes away the whole purpose of having this case. With the glass on the side and the front, you want to look in and see the fans in their glory, and having just this white panel with all the holes in it really looks like you haven't finished your PC to me. So although you're only getting a very minimal improvement in your temperatures, for me I think leaving the fans out at the side comes at too big a cost in terms of aesthetics. So just before we move on, I wanted to answer one final question about the bottom and side fans, and that was, if you just had enough money to get 3 fans, were you better to put them at the bottom or at the side? And you can probably already guess my answer from what I've said with the last question. In terms of aesthetics, those fans are going to look so much better on the side, but do I have any temperature data to back that up? So with the 3 fans on the side, our CPU idled 1 degree hotter, but it was 1 degree cooler under load. There was no difference to our GPU temperatures, both at idle or under load. And as you would expect, based on what I've told you already about the benefit in terms of noise with side intake fans, our PC was 1 decibel quieter, both at idle and under load, with the fans on the side. So summing that one up, there's absolutely no difference to the temperatures, whether the fans are at the bottom or the side, but your PC will run slightly quieter with the fans on the side, and in my opinion, it's going to look a whole lot better. So you are trying to keep costs down, and you've only got enough money for 3 fans to put either at the bottom or the side. My advice is put them on the side, based mostly on the aesthetics. The next thing I want to look at was how did altering our GPU's position in the case affect the temperatures and the noise. Obviously you can mount your GPU in the horizontal position like we've already done the testing for. You can turn it into a vertical position, and new with the O11 Dynamic EVO, you can mount it in the upright position, and that was the position I went for in my build guide. Now I'm going to test the GPU in all 3 of those positions, but to keep things fair, I wanted to do exactly the same fan configuration in each of those builds. So with the upright GPU position, you can't have any fans at the side. So the configuration I went for testing all three GPU positions was having the mesh panel on the front with 3 front fans set to intake. We had 3 fans at the bottom set to intake. We had our AIO at the top set to exhaust and a single rear exhaust fan. So starting off with comparing the GPU in the horizontal position compared to the upright position, when our GPU was in the upright position, our CPU idled 2 degrees hotter and it was 1 degree hotter under load. There was no difference to our GPU temperatures at idle, but during the ASUS stability test, having the GPU in the upright position meant it ran hotter by a whopping 17 degrees. And yes, you did hear me right, 17 degrees. In terms of noise levels, having the GPU in the upright position, our PC was 1 decibel quieter at idle, but again a whopping 8 decibels louder during the ASUS stability test, which can probably be explained by the GPU fans running significantly faster to try and cool the GPU, which was overheating. The next thing I wanted to do was test mounting the GPU in the vertical position. Unfortunately, I didn't have Lian Li's official kit for this case, which would have allowed me to mount the GPU in 2 different heights in the vertical orientation. I did use a kit from another manufacturer which only allowed me to mount it in one particular position in this case. So taking a look at our temperatures, comparing to the horizontal orientation, with the GPU mounted vertically, our CPU idled 1 degree hotter and there was no difference to the CPU temperatures under load. But we did get a significant improvement in the GPU temperatures under load, with the vertical position being 5 degrees cooler than the horizontal position and a whopping 22 degrees cooler than the upright position. In terms of noise levels, this was also slightly quieter under load by 2 decibels compared to the horizontal position, but again a whopping 10 decibels reduction in noise compared to the upright position. So the results here are fairly clear. While having your GPU mounted in upright position might look great, the temperatures are absolutely horrible. As well as that, the upright GPU kit is the most expensive accessory for this case. It's even more expensive than the vertical kit, so I can't recommend it at all. The results are also fairly clear that you get significant benefits from mounting your graphics card vertically in this case. I also thought aesthetically that was the best looking configuration. As well, when you consider that the vertical GPU kit that Lian Li are offering specifically for this case comes with a Gen 4 riser cable, this would be my preferred way to build in this case. If you don't want to spend any extra money, you can see that the temperatures are perfectly acceptable with your graphics card mounted horizontally, so either of those would be fine. The next thing I wanted to do was test the effects of adding the front mesh panel and 3 front intake fans with our GPU mounted vertically. Taking a look at the results, all our temperatures came down by 1 degree, both at idle and under load, and there was actually 1 decibel less noise at idle with the 3 front intake fans. So again here the results are very similar to what we found with the graphics card mounted horizontally. We are going to get a minor improvement in temperatures with the front intake fans and mesh panel, but that's going to cost us significant money to add 3 extra fans to the build and get the front mesh panel kit. And in terms of aesthetics, I think it makes the build look worse. So for me, I would probably avoid the front mesh panel and 3 intake fans at the front, because the benefits you're getting in terms of temperatures aren't worth it in terms of the cost to me. So my best configuration with the AIO at the top set to exhaust would be to have fans just at the bottom and the side set to intake and having a single rear exhaust fan. The next thing I wanted to do was test the effects of moving our AIO from the top of the case to the side. I moved the 3 120mm fans that were on the side to the top and set them to exhaust. So the first thing I wanted to test was, should we have our AIO on the side set to intake or exhaust? And if you've been listening closely to what I've said, you can probably already guess the results of this test. So taking a look at the temperatures, having our AIO set to intake, our CPU idled 5 degrees cooler and was a whopping 9 degrees cooler under load compared to having it set to exhaust. In terms of our GPU temperatures, there was no difference at idle, whereas having our AIO on the side set to intake, our GPU was 2 degrees hotter. In terms of noise levels, having our AIO set to intake, it was 1 decibel quieter at idle and 5 decibels quieter under load. So all these results were exactly what I was expecting. Having your AIO set to intake and you're actually moving cooler from outside the case through the radiator rather than hot air from inside the case through the radiator, you're going to get better cooling potential, so your CPU temperatures are going to be cooler. You would, however, expect your GPU temperatures to go up because you're actually bringing more hot air into the case rather than when you have an exhaust, you're taking hot air out of the case. And as I've already mentioned, having an AIO set to intake will give your build much quieter than when it's set to exhaust. So summing that up, massive improvement in CPU temperatures, minor increase in GPU temperatures under load, and a massive improvement in noise level with our AIO set to intake. So this one's fairly clear, you should have your AIO set to intake. When I did my testing in the original O11 dynamic, this was a big issue for me because having the radiator on the side set to intake was obviously the optimal configuration in terms of temperatures and noise, but at that time the fans were not so advanced and aesthetically it looked awful having the back of the fans on full display in this case, and I think this case is all about displaying your build. It's a showcase. Now we don't have that problem, so for me there's absolutely no reason that you shouldn't have your AIO on the side set to intake. So the next thing I wanted to look at was, did adding the front mesh panel and 3 front intake fans make any difference to the temperatures with the AIO on the side? Adding the 3 additional fans at the front, our CPU idled 1 degree hotter and was 2 degrees hotter under load. Our GPU also idled 1 degree hotter, although it was 2 degrees cooler under load. Noise levels were also worse with the 3 front intake fans by 1 decibel both at idle and under load. So this one's fairly clear. Adding the mesh panel and the 3 front intake fans actually makes your temperatures and noise levels slightly worse. It's going to look worse and it's going to cost you more money, so don't do it. So just before we write off the front mesh panel, I wanted to give it one final test, and there was one situation where I did expect it to give us a significant improvement, and that was if we were going to have our radiator on the side set to exhaust. Having that front mesh panel should bring lots of cool air into the case and then straight out the radiator. So it would be as if the radiator was getting cool air from outside the case. But the biggest advantage would be that rather than having your radiator on the side set to intake, where the hot air would come into the case, all the hot air would be going out the back of the case. So taking a look at the results with the front mesh panel, our CPU idled 3 degrees cooler and was a whopping 7 degrees cooler under load. Taking a look at our GPU temperatures, there was no difference at idle, but our GPU was 1 degree cooler with the front mesh panel and 3 front intake fans. In terms of noise levels, there was no difference at idle, but again, the front mesh panel did give us a significant improvement in the noise levels under load by 4 decibels. So this would be the one situation where I would recommend picking up the front mesh panel and an additional 3 fans for the front, and that is if you're going to have your AIO on the side set to exhaust. As I've already mentioned and shown in the previous tests, the simple way to avoid this is just have your AIO set to intake. But if you have a particular reason where you need it set to exhaust, for example, you want to use the fans that came with your AIO and they look absolutely awful the wrong way round, this is one way you can have it on the side set to exhaust and still get very acceptable temperatures and noise levels. But putting everything together, I think you get better overall temperatures and noise levels by simply having your AIO on the side set to intake without any additional fans at the front. So we now know what is the best configuration if you're going to have your AIO on the top set to exhaust, and what is the best configuration if you want to put your AIO on the side. But how do they compare, and where should you actually put your AIO? So comparing the best configurations so far, having the AIO on the side, our CPU was 3 degrees cooler and was 7 degrees cooler under load. There was no difference to the GPU temperatures at idle, but our GPU ran 2 degrees hotter with the side AIO. In terms of noise levels, with the side AIO, our PC was 1 decibel louder at idle, but was 2 decibels quieter under load. So putting all that together, my recommendation for the best IO placement in this case would be to have it on the side set to intake, because that way you're going to get a massive improvement in your CPU temperatures, although your GPU temperatures will go up a tiny amount compared to having it at the top set to exhaust. So just before we go into air cooling, I know some of you will be wondering about push-pull, and yes, there is space at the back of the case to add an additional set of fans behind the radiator. So I went ahead and added an additional 3 Lian Li unifans to the other side of the radiator, and yes, that is Lian Li AL and SL unifans joined together. At this stage I had exhausted my entire supply of them and had no choice but to mix and match the different types together. So taking a look at the temperatures, our CPU idle temperatures came down by 1 degree, although our temperatures under load increased by 1 degree with push-pull. There was no difference to our GPU temperatures, and the only difference with noise levels was the idle noise was down by 1 decibel with push-pull. So no big benefit to going with a push-pull setup, and again this is very similar to what I've found previously. Normally I find you reduce temperatures maybe by about 1 degree and add maybe 1 decibel or 2 of extra noise. So while you can do it in this case, there's probably not an awful lot of benefit to doing it. The next thing I wanted to do was take a look at our cooling, and one of the advantages of the O11 Dynamic EVO compared to the original O11 Dynamic is that the CPU cooler height has been significantly increased, and CPU coolers up to a maximum height of 167mm are now supported. The height of Noctua's NHD15 is 165, so it should fit. And as you can see it in front of me now, it does actually fit in the case. The only slight problem I had was whenever I came to try and close the glass panel on the side, and I couldn't get it fully closed. The big problem was the front fan was preventing the tempered glass panel from closing. So the only real option you had to use this cooler in this case would be to remove the front fan and use it with a single fan. Importantly, the RAM that I was using was Kingston Fury Beast, and it is very low profile, so I don't think that there's an option of using a lower profile RAM and getting this front fan to fit. So because I'd gone to the effort of installing the cooler, I thought I should run the thermal testing anyway. Particularly as the NHD15 is widely regarded as the king of air coolers, I thought I should test this case's maximum air cooling potential, even though you're not able to actually install this cooler with 2 fans in this case. So I was able to close the tempered glass panel by placing a box in front of it, allowing me to carry out the thermal testing. So the first configuration I looked at was with the NHD15. I had 3 fans at the bottom, the front and the side, all set to intake, maximising the air coming to the NHD15, 3 fans at the top and a single rear fan set to exhaust. The next thing I did was remove the front mesh panel and the 3 front intake fans and reran the tests. Interestingly, the only difference in temperature was that our GPU idled 1 degree cooler with the tempered glass panel on the front. However, the tempered glass panel was noisier by 2 decibels at idle and 1 decibel under load. The final thing to do was to compare the best cooling configuration using the IIO with the air cooler. So taking a look at the temperatures, with the IIO our CPU idled 4 degrees cooler and was 7 degrees cooler under load. The GPU temperatures were also better by 1 degree both at idle and under load. Although the IIO was slightly louder at idle by 2 decibels, it was significantly quieter under load by 5 decibels. So putting everything together in terms of aesthetics, temperatures and noise, the configuration that I would recommend for the O11 Dynamic EVO would be to mount your graphics card in a vertical orientation, put your IIO on the side set to intake, have intake fans at the bottom, have exhaust fans at the top and the rear, and stick with a tempered glass panel at the front rather than the mesh kit that comes as an optional extra. So hopefully you found this video useful. If you are thinking on building in this case, you'll be able to use to decide how you're going to lay out your components. If you have found the video useful, please remember to give it a thumbs up. And if you're not currently subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button as well. Thanks for watching.